A very good morning to all. In the last class, we started with the chapter Light, Shadows and Reflections. Today, we are moving on to the next topic, that is Objects and their Shadows. So based on transparency, objects can be classified as following, that is transparent objects, translucent objects and opaque objects. So which are they? Transparent objects, translucent objects and opaque objects. So let's discuss them one by one. The first one is transparent objects. So what are transparent objects? So the objects that allow light to pass through them are called transparent objects. For example, clear glass, clear water, all these are examples for transparent objects. Why? Because they allow light to pass through them and we can easily see through them. We can clearly see through them. So what are transparent objects? Objects that allow light to pass through them. And through a transparent object, we can see. We can clearly see through a transparent object. Moving on to the next one, that is translucent objects. So what are translucent objects? Objects that allow light to pass through them but partially. We can see through the translucent objects but not clearly. For example, tracing paper, frosted glass, all these are examples for translucent objects. Why? They allow light to pass through them but partially. We can see through them but not clearly. So that is why these objects are called translucent objects. Moving on to the next one, that is opaque objects. So what are opaque objects? The objects that do not allow light to pass through them. We cannot see through an opaque object. For example, wood, stone, all these are examples for opaque objects. Why these objects are called opaque objects? Because we cannot see through them and they do not allow light to pass through them. So these objects are called as opaque objects. So objects can be classified as transparent objects which allow light to pass through them and we can clearly see through it. And the next type, that is translucent object that allow light to pass through them but partially. Then the next type, that is the opaque objects that do not allow light to pass through them. So such objects we call it as opaque objects. So now let's see about shadow. So what is the meaning of shadow? Shadow means the dark patches. So you can see the shadow of the man on the ground. Now let's see, when is a shadow formed? Shadow is formed when light is blocked. So when is shadow formed? Shadow is formed when light is blocked. So shadows are formed when an opaque object is placed across the path and it blocks the light. So if you closely observe this picture, you can see the light comes from this direction. And this is an opaque object and this object does not allow the light to pass through them. We know that the opaque object does not allow light to pass through them. So when the light comes from this direction, the light gets blocked here. What happens? The light gets blocked here because this opaque object does not allow the light to pass through them. So that the light gets blocked here. And from all other direction, the light passes easily. As no light passes through this object, what happens is a dark patch is formed on the other side. And that dark patch is the shadow of the opaque object. Here you can see the apple, which is an opaque object, and this object does not allow light to pass through them. So that as no light passes through this object, there is a dark patch that is formed on the other side, and this dark patch is the shadow of this object. So this is how shadow is formed. The shape and size of the shadow, it depends on the position of the opaque object and source of light. No matter what the color of the object is, the shadow will always be black or shades of grey. The shadow is formed when the light is blocked. So this is how shadow of an object is formed. In this class, we discussed about objects and their shadows. Objects can be classified as transparent, translucent and opaque objects. And then we discussed about when is shadow formed. Shadow is formed when the light gets blocked, when the light is blocked. So I hope the class was clear to you. You can go through page number 148 and 149 and read what we have discussed today. So we'll meet in the next class and we'll discuss a new topic. Till then, thank you.